This is the season of amplification. This is a special season for those who grew in their reverence for God while going through the turmoil of the COVID pandemic. You are now in position for a level change. And when I say a level change, it's not a level up, but a level of depth. See, it's an Eurocentric perspective to think the higher you go in life, the closer to God you become. But in ancient African wisdom, it tells us that it is the depth of your knowledge, the depth of your wisdom, the depth of your understanding, and how you allow it to live through you in your actions that gives you the opportunity to get behind the veil where God exists. This is a special season for those who have a healthy fear in God and not in a COVID mutation or a variant that continues to put restraints on our old way of living. Because in the depth of our understanding, we know that change is imminent. And our ability to adapt to change will reflect on how we fulfill God's purpose in our lives. We are still on mission, regardless of the COVID pandemic. This season of amplification is a special season for those who spent God's currency wisely. And that's that extra time we were given to spend in our households, to fortify our relationships with our families. That extra time we had to edify our minds, our bodies, and our spirits so we become more prepared to walk in this new beginning. This is a special season. See, the number 22 is considered a master number because it duplicates and amplifies divine energy. At this moment in time, for the next 365 days, you are getting double the strength, double the creativity, double the protection, double the drive and determination, double the love. This season of amplification, yes, you are made ready for your spiritual breakthrough of 22. Everything is in your reach, but it's still up to you to go get it. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? Hopefully, this new year has already been a blessing. Where let me show you my cup. Where your cup is overflowing. Okay. Mm. I got a big cup, so I wanted to make sure that as these blessings come in, I got a big enough cup to hold some stuff. Cause just in case I can't drink these blessings too fast, they're coming a little slower. How y'all doing? How y'all doing? This is the first uh, class of Roots and Culture, World of Akiba and Roots and Culture, African History class of the year. Yes. So I hope you came out of the holiday season, came through the new year. I hope you got that blessing, realizing that everything that you're doing that is destined by God is going to be given that extra attention or that extra energy from God, from the ancestors, from the spirits, from the Creator, everybody around you. So this is that season that you could tap into if you know what God has called you to do and be. Where has God asked you to walk? There is extra amplified energy on your behalf. So we want to make sure that we tap into that. Today, we talking about African history. And so, as we go and we continue working on African history, growing on roots and culture, World of the Kibble and African history class, we're focused on the rise of the African. Yes, that's right. We're focused on the rise of the African. This is a social media pan-African movement where we are pulling black youth, black parents, black people, the black diaspora together under one umbrella for the sake and the sole purpose of self-determination, determining who we are in God through the perspective of how we see fit, making sure that we shake off the shackles of colonialism, the shackles of the mark of slavery, and so that we can be what we were called to be, which is a people unto the Creator. And so, as you watch, always inviting you to send an email to info@worldofakibbaland.org. We'll be sending out an email blast, and I'll be directly asking individuals as the community comes in, and or the topics get even deeper about African history, that we begin to have a discussion group, and that's what we're looking for. Have a discussion group about the information and the facts that are being shared. So if you would like to participate in this open group as we begin to develop that this year, uh, send an email to info@worldofakibbaland.org. There we go. And also make sure that you tune in to all of our um, programming for the week. Right now, we doing a five, and I got another one that's coming super soon. This is like before the end of January. We got another show that I'm going to be producing. Um, so we got a lot to turn out. Got a big announcement coming real soon. Hopefully, I get to finish the editing on that particular announcement this week, right? So that y'all can check a look at it. But please join us on Sunday for a Keeble Inspirational Service at noon. Join us on Tuesdays where we can get that African Speaks, and those are for the teenagers and adults, of course. The kids, you can listen to it and explain the world around them so that they're getting a understanding of the life that they're living in. AfriStream is topics from the diaspora, and we give you a Pan-African perspective on it. Not only do we give you the facts, but we're going to have you to look at it a particular way, looking from the eyes of self-determination. And is it going for, because we say there's nothing more sacred than the liberation of black people, so does it help liberate black people, or is it down, is it take us away from the liberation of ourselves? And then, of course, we have African history class, which is on Saturdays, 1 o'clock. We here. This is it. And right after that, make sure you watch the understanding African spirituality. That's definitely a blessing. The concept is, and we'll also repeat this in the next hour, that to to study the history of your people, to study the history of the development of your culture, study the history, of everything about us that makes us us, right? And all the contributions that we gave to the world. You can't study that without studying the spiritual foundation of that people. How did they see and define spirituality, religion, God, relationships? That's important, right? And this is pre-colonialism. This is without colonialization. This is without the negative influence of European monarchies, dictatorships, and kings, right? Who were we as a people before all of this happened? I see my son Miles up in there. One love, young man. I got something for you. Um, and then, so we want to make sure we do that. Now, as we move forward, we want to also, if you, let me, do I have it up here? Do I have it up here? I thought I did. Okay, so this tells me that it's not up here. Oh, yes, I do. Here we go. It's with the click. If you're watching us on Facebook, wait, let me switch it. Please like, comment, share. This is how we get this out. If you have friends who have young kids who who want to have their kids educated on who they are. If you're trying to deepen your wisdom and your knowledge about who you are as a black man, black woman, as a black family. I would love to have black families, and so Miles, I'm talking to you, brother. Black families join us on the open conversation during the class so that we can discuss the topics, the information that is given, and how it resonates or doesn't resonate, or how you balance that out. That would be a great thing. So like, comment, and share. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because again, we are doing this on multiple levels, multiple platform, multiple classes. So every time we go live, uh, and I try not to do the pre-recorded, because I want a scenario where we get to a point where you can ask questions. You know what I mean? We can judge data. One, this I am not the expert. I am the Malakio. I'll say it again. I am not the expert. I am the Malakio. And in our community, the Malakio, it means seeker. And so I'm the one who's seeking truth, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And so as I go out and I seek the information, I try to internalize the information I share with you. Now, to let you know that this particular class was something that was charged to me, meaning that they were watching what we were doing in our community with World of Akiba and said, you have the technology and the know-how. And I actually did teach the individual who blessed me with this information, but he said, you have the technology and the know-how to actually get this out to the people. And this is all the information. It comes from YouTube University. However, we also have something called the People's Library. The People's Library. And if you take a look at the People's Library, when I looked up and went to do research on Kush, all I had to do was type in the word Kush and look up what rolls on this 6 terabyte hard drive of African history. All of this. Now I couldn't go through all of it, so and so it actually literally overwhelmed me. Almost. How about that? It almost literally overwhelmed me. But I sat down and I said, I pulled up some documents, right? Right here. I read some things, you know, I took some notes, and then I went and I did it a couple of times, and then I went to YouTube to uh, capture some video. So I got video from the archive of the People's Library, and I got video from uh, YouTube University. And that's another thing that we'll talk about as we begin to edify. We're going to do that Afrocation, which is my word. I've never heard anybody use it before. It's African education, where you're learning from an African perspective. And so we can give views on the world according to who we are in our culture, tradition, and how we relate to each other, and how we see ourselves through the eyes of God. If God had eyes, ain't that something? Um, and so in the Afrocation of your mind, body, and spirit, we say it's supposed to do two things. It's supposed to, one, teach you how to operate in a society of operant conditioning and systematic oppression. It teaches you how to operate through it to get the best of you. Even though we're here, we need to get the best of who we are while we are in this situation and circumstance. That's what an African education will do for you. Give you a clear identity of self, clear identity of your current events, clear identity of your surroundings, and show you how to operate to manifest the best of you. The second thing it does, it steers you towards self-determination. If you Once you get the best of you, and you're getting the resources, you're getting the education, you're developing who and whose you are, then the issue is, can you connect with other people so that we can work towards self-determination? People talking about you need to just be an entrepreneur. I said, you need to be an entrepreneur who's focused on self-determination. Because if your money only satisfies and blesses you, and you moved out the hood, you ain't in our community. Where your business at and where you live at should reflect a whole lot of things. So it's if you're talking about self-determination, um, you know that you are getting Afrocation, where it's showing you how to maneuver and walk through and live and grow as a people. And this is not just something that's happening nationally. We're talking about for the African diaspora. So we share this social media and internet is all over the world, and it is a part of what we're doing to make sure that we move beyond our our immediate boundaries into a greater life experience as a people. Now, as we move forward, just to recap some of the things that we have gone over, we have talked about the development of the country, the states, Pangea, has it, how it's separated, how it was all one mass, and how it's separated. One of the things that we talked about the migration of man. Now, one of the essential parts that I didn't see in the African in the People's Library, right? Or in the, well, let's get it, the curriculum that comes with the People's Library. One of the things that I didn't see in the curriculum was the importance of the Nile River. Now, everything that when we start talking about the civilizations of African culture and the antiquity of these civilizations, how old they are. Africans, there is no civilization older than African civilization. There's no civilization that gave more to the world than African civilization. And when we get to the intro of this particular section, when we're dealing with the Kush, the Cushites, the Cushite Empire, you thought I would say the Egyptians. No, and it blew my mind. Oh, were they talking about Kush? Oh, I understood why they had to separate. When you're reading about Kush and the development of the civilization, I understood why they had to separate Egypt from the rest of Africa, because you couldn't talk about the Kush civilization without dealing with the center of Africa. There is absolutely no way. So then when you talk, because when you look at the Nile and when you talk about Egypt and they talked about the Nile River, one thing they never said in my studies growing up, how the Nile stretched across 11 other countries in Africa. 11. And so how many civilizations developed along the Nile in reference to having that as a gift from God? Woo. That's it. A gift from God. Let's take a look at it. And you can see how Kemet, which is the name of Egypt, how that is according to the Kush Empire, the Put Empire. I can't see the little one, and then the other one down there, I can't pronounce it. But I know it's down there, Ethiopia and the Sudan. I know those words, right? But the Ethiopia and the Sudan, they did not want to talk to you about the developing countries or civilizations that were happening around that time, because Egypt wasn't the only one. However, Egypt connected to Mesopotamia, right? That river up top. I don't know if you can see my, yeah, I don't think you can see my pointer, but I'm pointing at the river above Kemet, right? That's where the Romans and the Greeks were coming in. You see, the crossover is where the was it the Persians and the Assyrians were coming in to Egypt to come down and try to take over Africa. Everybody was talking about that. Why? Because it was a life of plenty. They had plenty, and that's when you start dealing with the culture and the civilizations that were the first cultures and the first civilizations that were created. Because in that, with the blessing that God gave as the Nile River in the center of Africa where civilization blossomed, you can talk about, and we said it's important that we take a look at culture. It is the learning mechanism of a people. It is the lifestyle of a people. It is the behavior rituals, the faith, the food, everything, the customs of a people. How they go about their day-to-day encounters and interactions. That's important. Because when you understand the culture of a people, and then you see the civilization that the culture created. So in the experience where you're dealing with the culture of an African people sitting on the Nile River, where they said it was, and oh man, you gotta come to the African spirituality class, because we're going to talk about the blessings of how they saw the blessings of God and how they looked at everything. We're going to talk about here in terms of what they created, but there you'll hear the spirit that governed the people and that allowed them to create such wonderful, wonderful civilizations that bless the planet with everything. So civilization is a complex society of, 5 characteristics, which are advanced cities, specialized workers, complex institutions, record keeping, and advanced technology. Now imagine that stretching from the top or the bottom of Africa where Egypt exists all the way down to the nose of Africa, to the horn, they call it, the horn of Africa, to Ethiopia, all the way down there. And imagine the civilizations that started there. That was key. That was important for us to get. So when we go now into the Kush, we're not starting with the we Egyptians, but you're gonna hear Egypt and Kush talk. You're gonna hear a whole lot of that, and you're gonna hear the fact that Egyptians were nothing but Cushite nomads that colonized the area. Ain't that something? So that's a whole nother conversation that you don't get. That the Egyptians were nomads coming from the Kush Empire. Let me show you the map again. Look at the Kush Empire. And they traveled to Kemet, which is Egypt, along the Nile. They weren't hungry. There was no deserts. It was thriving, nothing but food and agriculture and animals, and they had pottery, and well, we're gonna get into that, but understand what was there. And so we want to open ourselves up to the experience of the civilizations. Now, one of the things before we start I want to add is that in these civilizations there was no need of hunger. There was no need of brutalization for the sake of survival. No. Now, there was wars over territories, there was wars over trading, there was wars over a lot of things, but it wasn't trying to destroy. Now, when you get to certain things, you'll see that the destruction didn't happen until European invasion. Ain't that something? Because it's not about the expansion, it's about taking over a culture, resources that made them one of the greatest, that made the country, or the continent rather, of Africa, the greatest thing that ever lived. And everybody sitting around who was receiving, because Greece and Rome were receiving goods. They had to come to Africa to receive their oats and grains and rices and beans. This is where they got it from. And so in the minds of someone who doesn't have a Nile River, and they said when even in the flood they thanked God. In floods they would thank God. Why? Because the floods would recede, because the flooding of areas of the Nile River, once the waters went down, the earth was then completely fertile for planting and growing and developing. And so if you had in governmenting, if you had, and if you were watching the last stream, when we talked about the Nile, and in Egypt, as well as Kush, if you were along the banks of the Nile and it flooded, your taxes went up. Right? Because you was affected by a flood, your taxes went up. Why? Because you know that after the flood season, harvesting comes. Agriculture and harvesting comes, and they know that you can produce. So those who were not afflicted by the flood, who didn't have fertile land, could eat. They said we need to spread this around. We understand that you have more, but your taxes has to go up. Why? Because we have to make sure that everybody in our civilization has food. Wow. Let's take out the look at the intro. I'm taking notes while y'all taking notes.
Now, it must be remembered that as we see it today, we're seeing it in the context of desert. But the Cushites had a national system of reservoirs crisscrossing their country. And essentially, all of this would have been green. And we need to see it in that kind of context.
I want to pause real quick because when you see what it looked like according to the up and down the Nile, you'll understand the lifestyle and culture and the civilization that is based off of African communal living. When there is green, there is abundance of food, cattle. They had irrigation to get water to the areas that did not have water. Sharing. There was no need for brutality. There was no need for robbery and stealing. There was no need for none of that. Why? Because everyone had. And so they even though they had so much, they could actually share. That's why that trading route was important. Because those who didn't have came to the area of Africa that did have to trade, to purchase, to buy, exchange. This is going to be real short before we get to the next one. Let's continue.
Not as the desert as it is now, but as a brilliant attempt of Africans early on to, if you like, counter the encroaching desert with their national system of reservoirs.
When you add together all of the Great Basins, you get two things. One, you can calculate the amount of manpower and womanpower that was needed to move all of that earth. It's equivalent to building a pyramid. It's literally equivalent to building the Great Pyramid. It's an incredible state enterprise.
Some of the ornamentation decorating the structures are quite interesting because some of the animals depicted, such as elephants and cows.
The Africans of the Nile Valley were famous for domesticating animals. It has been said that they lived in harmony with the natural world, and that even the big cats would walk side by side with them.
Now that was a short one, right? We have some that's going to go in detail. So I'm prepping you for because again, the information about Kush is so huge, it will overwhelm you. I mean, because I might spend a couple of weeks on this just to make sure we get an understanding of what Kush brought to fruition in the world. Now, one of the things they talked about was the water irrigation, and they said how many they said they tested to see what that process was, how many people it would take to get the water irrigation right, to get that ditch flowed right. Communal work. That's communal work. That's not slavery. That was communal work. The part where they said they lived in harmony with nature, you need to access African history, African spirituality class. That oneness with God. Everything is God. How we live, how we eat, how we work, how we share, how we do everything. Everything is God. Even the cats, they said we domesticated the animals. They would even ask God, and we'll talk about this during African spirituality class. There were prayers and rituals that would discuss about even hunting animals. God, allow us to catch the animals that we seek to hunt, to eat. Allow us to tame the animals that we seek to tame, to eat. Because you got to milk a cow. You got to feed a cow. You had enough grass. Everything was about being at harmony with God. Period. So when you get into the war where Kush went into Egypt, I want y'all to listen to this. When y'all get into the war, when Kush took over Egypt, after they took it over, they left. They did not want to necessarily control. It was the fact that Egypt could not control the borders. And so European and foreign invasion was happening too often in Egypt. And the Kush, who had a serious army was tired, and he said, look, we don't want them coming to threaten us, so we definitely don't want them threatening you. So we're gonna take you over. And then we're gonna when they felt that Cush felt like they were out of a spiritual alignment. And so we're gonna realign you in terms of your practices and your faith. And we're gonna leave because we don't want to occupy you. We want to go back home. But we want you to be able to maintain and sustain the living of the Nile, which stretches down 11, because you have one come in and another come in, and they'll go further down. And so Cush was not about to take over Egypt or Kemet at the time. No, we want to control it, but we only want to control it for the sake of it existing according to what it's supposed to be, not according to what another monarch, foreign dictator says. Ain't that something? Because a lot of people, we discuss the brutality of African life. There was always wars. There was wars in Africa. Wait a minute, and I need y'all to watch this, because the war before colonialism, the war before the influence of European invasions, wars before then was completely different. After the influence, psychological, emotional, mental, spiritual, all of it, before, with the influence of European invasion, because now you don't see a apple tree for the sake of we all get to eat. You see an apple tree that if you take off my apple, I'm going to cut your hands. Now, of course, stealing and murder was against God in African culture. For the sake of you just kill to kill, just steal to steal. You didn't have to. Hey, I'm hungry. Communal living. Hey, I need a place to stay. Communal living. All communal. So watch this. Be careful when they start talking about the wars. Look at the difference between, and you'll see it. The differences between colonialism, wars after colonialism, and we'll get, as we go down through African history, we'll get to that point where you'll see that the direct influences, the real wars that Africa had to have with Rome and Greece. We'll get to there. But here we're talking about before, and you'll hear about Rome too. But enjoy. This is a little bit longer one. I'm taking notes while y'all taking notes. I am not the expert. I'm the Malekio. I'm enjoying myself right now. Let's go.
Nubia is very important concerning the antiquity of African civilization and its contributions to the more recognized Egyptian civilization. Contrary to popular belief, the first recognized civilization in the Nile Valley was not Egyptian, but Nubian. Thus, wouldn't it only be natural that Nubian rulers would have held some sway over Egyptian civilization before the 25th dynasty? Today, we'll explore that answer. Some of the earliest sources outside of Africa, primarily Greek sources, point to the antiquity of Nubian people and civilization. Initially, many Greek scholars actually traveled to Egypt to learn from a civilization they deemed older than theirs. Upon their arrival, to their surprise, they would learn that there existed on the African continent an even older civilization. This civilization or people would be known as the Ethiopians to the Greeks, what we would call Nubians or the people of the Sudan today. The two primary Greek historians that seem to be more open to this idea and more vocal about what they were told in Egypt were Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus.
Now, what I want to add is, in that space, the same way we in my community say you just can't study the Bible and get everything, you have to study the history of everything that went around. If you understand the cultures that were around what they call sacred scriptures, then you can understand the reality and the importance of each scripture, what they were going through, the history of that people, and why certain things are sacred and certain things are not. And you can probably also tell, I know I can, the influence of Roman and Greece when they realized we couldn't conquer this people, so we had to take over the religion. And that's where you get Catholicism for. And from Catholicism, you get Protestantism. From Protestants, you got today's, Christianity. And so you got to be careful. But what they did do, what Romans were not going to do completely, was lie to themselves. So when you're looking at this culture, why we got to look at Roman? Easy, because they didn't lie to themselves when they were explaining it. They weren't lying. And so when you say, wait a minute, not only is this culture older than ours, when you're thinking because they're all they're doing is doing trade routes to Egypt, right? And so when they realized that Egypt was a manifestation of something that was older than Egypt, they were like, whoa, here's a step back. That's something that we have to take a look at now. Let's chart this. Let's look at this. Let's write this. And so how they see it, because you think it's I'm going to sit down and say black folk is going to say what they want to say because of what they want to say. Be careful, because we in this community, we studied, we researched, okay. And that is another thing that is important when it comes, because I have a friend who he's always arguing about African wars. I said, dude, do you ever make a decision to read? And I sent him an email, and if he does not watch this today or look at this today, man, I'm gonna be blowing him up online, because what has happened to what we contributed to the world versus what we're giving contribution for, and then how we had wars versus how we were influenced. Two different things. And so understand that they too knew the value of African history and African culture and African tradition. So why do you run away from it? We run not, because we know that history gives us self-awareness. Let's keep going.
Interestingly enough, Diodorus Siculus, upon his visit to Egypt, spoke with a local who attributes most of Egypt's civilization to the Nubian people. Diodorus told us what he heard while he was there. They say that the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Nubians, Osiris having been the leader of the colony, and the larger part of the customs of the Egyptians are, they hold, Nubian, the colonists still preserving their ancient manners. For instance, the belief that their kings are gods, the very special attention which they pay to their burials, and many other matters of a similar nature are Nubian practices. Many other things are also told by them concerning their own antiquity and the colony which they sent out that became the Egyptians. So from the very beginning, it would seem as though, at least from early Nile Valley accounts, based on what Diodorus was told, Egypt was a colony of Nubian migrants who began bringing their culture to that part of the Nile. This would seem to align with the idea that the Nubian kingdom of Taseti, the Nile Valley's first recognizable civilization, later became an Egyptian city after the first ruler Menes conquered the region. Based on what Diodorus is telling us, the Nubians, who first came down the Nile to go into Egypt, over time became the Egyptians. This is not to say at all that the Egyptians are Nubians, as many Africans across the continent migrated into Egypt. But it does suggest that the foundation of Egyptian culture and civilization are Nubian, according to ancient oral and written tradition. What's even more telling is the invention of the so-called Egyptian hieroglyphs that is claimed to be of Nubian origin by Diodorus. As mentioned in a previous video, the very hieroglyphic symbol for a human face no doubt resembles a typical Nubian or Sudanese man who would have existed during that time. Diodorus tells us, the shapes of their statues and the forms of their letters are Nubian, for of the two kinds of writing which the Egyptians have, that which is known as popular is learned by everyone, while that which is called sacred is understood only by the priests of the Egyptians who learn it from their fathers as one of the things which are not divulged. But among the Nubians, everyone uses these forms of letters. We must now speak about the Nubian writing, which is called hieroglyphic.
Before we go on about the Nubian writing, which is called hieroglyphics, Egypt colonized by nomads, one. Two, you hear, he said, this is what I'm hearing, he's learning. They're there to learn. They're there to study. They're there to understand culture, tradition, the sciences, right? And so this is where you get Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. Let's get it. Let's get it. This is where they came, the body of information from Greeks and Romans came from, because they were studying from civilizations older than theirs. And when they went to Egypt, they realized, wait a minute, there is an even a more ancient one. Now, the thing about the Kush, yeah, you can't come here. You're not coming down here. So you got the information from up there. And so in order for them to even think that they could come down, they would have to take it over first. Ain't that something? Now, when you talk about the 360 degrees of knowledge, right? And they said there's certain information that that everybody had, but they didn't have. The only people that had all the wisdom was the priests, and they got it from their fathers. So everybody didn't have all wisdom because everybody wasn't walking in the spiritual a light to be able to receive it, hold it, retain it. It just wasn't, right? So then when you come in and you studying as a foreigner, yeah, we're only going to give you certain levels of information. This is why you can't understand. We're going to give you what you can understand, but we won't give you everything. This is why white folks European societies could have never built a pyramid. It's not for you to learn. There were certain wisdoms that they were not given, certain information and disciplines that they would not teach. And so that's the part that you look at, where when Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, all these individuals leave Egypt or Kemet, where they studied, the Temple of Luxor, where they studied, they would go back to their areas as aliens, because you're teaching us a foreign doctrine. We don't know this. Pythagorean Pythagorean didn't come up with the theory. He got it from Africa, and he took it back to teach it. Now what they did was, when they tried to take over the world, they also tried to take over the fact that in terms of paradigm, we are the source of knowledge and wisdom. And it looks like, wow, we're going to go over today. I'm having a good time. I hope y'all learning. Let's go.
Among the Egyptians, in order that we may omit nothing in our discussion of their antiquities. As Diodorus continues with his talking points, he drops a gem. He himself calls hieroglyphics a Nubian writing form and alludes to the idea that it was invented by them. Now, of course, this perspective is in stark contrast to what we in the Western world accept, but in actuality, this account does fall precisely in line with ancient oral and written tradition. If Nubia was indeed the first civilization on the Nile, and oral history maintains that Egypt used to be a colony of Nubian migrants or perhaps conquerors, then we should also expect to see some rulers in early Egyptian history who were of Nubian extraction. Interestingly enough, this is exactly what we see in Old Kingdom Egypt, at least from an account from another Greek historian named Herodotus. Herodotus claims that an Egyptian priest told him the following. The priest said that Mena was the first king of Egypt. Next, they read me from a papyrus the names of 330 monarchs who they said were his successors upon the throne. In this number of generations, there were 18 Nubian kings and one queen who was a native. All the rest were kings and Egyptians. We've come a very long way from the ancient Greek historical perspective, which all seems to tell us the same story, that Nubia is not only older than Egypt, but is the foundation from which Egyptian culture took off. Traditionally, we accept the fact that Nubian pharaohs controlled Egypt in the 25th dynasty, but rarely do we hear about this ancient perspective concerning numerous Nubian pharaohs in the Old Kingdom. From this Greek account, we can see that the religious vigor and feelings of ownership over the Nile Valley civilization proclaimed by the Cushite pharaohs and he observes us expect to see some Egypt in 30 months off the 5th dynasty, but rarely do we hear about this ancient perspective concerning numerous Nubian pharaohs in the Old Kingdom. From this Greek account, we can see that the religious vigor and feelings of ownership over the Nile Valley civilization proclaimed by the Cushite pharaohs makes perfect sense. It's also important to note that Diodorus and Herodotus were simply documenting the oral tradition within Africa itself, as the Egyptians or Nubians they spoke with told them this. Diodorus traveled to Egypt around 60 and 56 BC, and Herodotus is believed to have traveled as far as Upper Egypt. And so, these two Greek scholars would have immediate access to first-hand oral accounts of African history, more importantly, from an African perspective. In other words, if we are to cast doubt on the accounts of these Greek scholars, then we also have to cast doubt on the oral tradition coming out of the Nile Valley itself. It certainly would have been interesting if we got the names of these Old Kingdom Nubian pharaohs. Unfortunately, today, we can only speculate.
Come off. Woo! That's a good intro for the next video. And so what he talked about was, and it was clear, I'm going off for oral tradition because it is a part of tradition that they didn't write down everything, and you'll see it in the next video where writing became a part of keeping their history, right? When they said, I read off a papyrus, right? 300 names, 300 kings, Nubian, 18 generations were Nubian. So it was Kush and Egypt. Egypt being, and so he also made the statement where everybody in there everybody in Egypt wasn't all Egyptian. Why? Because people traveled where? To the Nile. And so all up and down the Nile, there were people there to enjoy life. However, the kingship of Egypt, or Kemet, was either from Kush or from Egypt, yeah, itself. Now, they talk about it as being the oldest civilization. Rome, the oldest civilization. So who is not? If they're writing it and they're saying it and they're believing it and they learned from it, why do we push away ourselves? When we understand that understanding and studying our history gives us self-awareness and self-discovery. Because when you tap into who you are in God, and the culture he gave you to understand who you are in God, something different. All right, let's take a look at the next video.
It's brought to you by Captivating History. In the 8th century BC, a kingdom from northern Africa invaded Egypt and extended as far as the modern-day Middle East. Identified by the Egyptians as Kush, it evolved from a local settlement named Kerma into one of the most fascinating empires in African history. They reached their zenith after the fall of the new kingdom of Egypt. Often overlooked by modern historians, wrongly so, the Cushites married the artistic fervor of the Egyptians with the vibrancy of African traditions. Like a breath of fresh air, they ushered in an age of Egyptian Renaissance and provided some of the most significant contributions to both African and Egyptian cultures.
I want to interject real quick so you get it. Realize the information from the last video was from somebody from the diaspora. This is captured by European individuals. Realize how they said the Cushites created a Egyptian-like lifestyle when it was the reverse, right? So he's not telling you about pirates. He's not telling you about the history of Greek. He's not telling you how Greek recorded it. He's not telling you that in one of them will say, well, Greek called the whole region Ethiopia, the land of the burnt faces. A lot of times we get our study on Africa, not just by archaeology and anthropology and those areas of science, but also how other cultures recorded in their history their interaction with Africa. Right? So we have to know when and this is why, listen, because he just said Kush mirrored the image of the Egyptian lifestyle. We know that that's untrue right now. And so we got to understand it in the research and study and the digging of our own history. We got to know that they're going to try to keep everything from us. And so just the little seeds that they drop, you got to be able to pick on quick. There's nothing more sacred than the liberation of black people. When that comes first, you'll be able to instantly pick up data that is not right according to who we are as a people. Now let us continue.
But who were the Cushites, and where did they come from? The Cushites had their stronghold in modern-day Sudan, in the valley of the Nile. But to understand where they came from, one has to go way back. Let's turn the clock back to 5000 BC. Due to its proximity to the Nile, the land of northern Africa was quite favorable to agriculture. The people lived in small, independent, and mobile communities. Archaeological findings estimate that these groups were engaged in fishing, hunting, farming, and livestock. Over the next few centuries, temperatures started dropping in the entire region. The land became riper, inviting more people into the hospitable Nile Valley. The Egyptians used to call the Nile the source of life, and it's not hard to see why. The North African region of Nubia starts with the formation of Nile proper and extends toward the Mediterranean, and was an extensive source of raw materials. As climate conditions turned favorable by the year, populations started to grow. Around 3000 BC, the region began to give shape to an urban settlement called Kerma, one of the first ones in sub-Saharan Africa. Within the next 500 years, it developed into a thriving urban culture, the home of the Cushites. Connected by the Nile, the Egyptians and the Cushites had been in contact since the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BC. But it was not until the establishment of Kerma that the relationship intensified, at times complementary, at times hostile and competitive. The kingdoms had back-and-forth invasions. When cooler heads prevailed and amicable terms were agreed upon, commerce flourished. Trade was conducted mainly through land, as were invasions. Navigation across the Nile was near impossible, save for a high tide. Speaking of trade, the North African region occupied one of the most opportune geographical locations on the planet, especially for Kush, which was part of some of the most critical trans-African routes. The East and the West came head-to-head at the Red Sea, whereas the South and the North came together against the Mediterranean. So, the Kush had access to the eastern routes toward India and China, and those for heading inland into southern Africa. And if that wasn't enough, they also had access to the Nile Delta and the Mediterranean Sea. Egypt's internal strife was escalating for a while before the tribes of Thebes and Hyksos finally went to war around 1570 BC, giving the Kush free reign of the land. The population of Kerma had already reached about 10,000 people by 1700 BC, so they decided to extend their influence and established a new city towards the south. The city, called Napata, was home to Jebel Barkal, a sacred mountain that held significant religious and navigational value to the Kush. While Egypt was involved in internal squabbles, Napata thrived. Eventually,
Real quick, when you see these images, remember the images green. When you see these images, of course, because this is the only images they have of it, remember, I want you to visualize what they show you in desert, visualize it all green, visualize nothing but farmland, visualize animals and families. It did not look like this. That's another thing that they don't teach us, or they don't tell you. You're like, there's no way civilization could have raised in the desert, because they're not telling you it wasn't a desert. Watch it. If you looked at the clip that we had on the Nile and how Egypt now is trying to govern the Nile from everybody, creating a dam and everything that they're trying to do in terms of stopping and controlling the flow of water, when at one point they knew that it belonged to God. And so they're not trying to control the water or the source, right? Because if you do, what happens? Then you have relationships. And then remember the long-standing civilizations also, that these civilizations existed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. That was another thing. And me trying to keep up with how long was this dynasty? How long was this dynasty? Who was the king here? They said 300 kings. You got to be careful of how they give the information and the visualization. In the history of African civilization and its growth and development, it's all green. Let us go.
evolving from a mere chiefdom into a full-fledged empire. The people of Kush increased in wealth and influence. The morale boost from Jebel Barkal and the economic resourcefulness acted as catalysts to the already steady ascent. By 1600 BC, the Cushites were taking over most of the trade routes in the region, which did not sit well with the Egyptians. But as annoyed as they were, the Egyptians had their own problems to deal with. In the period of the New Kingdom, 1567 to 1085 BC, Egypt established control of Nubia and invaded Palestinian and Syrian provinces, becoming one of the largest empires of ancient times. But by the end of the era, outside forces had started to gain, and Egypt had lost considerable ground. The The civil wars and tribal disputes between kings were taking their inevitable toll as well. The Palestinian and Syrian land was lost, and Egypt was disintegrating bit by bit. Eventually, the Libyans invaded and took control of Egypt. At the time, King Kashta ruled the land of Kush. He decided to finally focus his people's attention inwards and become the first monarch of the newly established kingdom of Kush. An influential man with considerable power, he invaded Egypt and was able to conquer Thebes. His goals were not facetious or bound by boastful glory, but instead united by a singular purpose. The religious tenets of both Egyptians and Cushites were virtually identical. Kashta wanted to appeal to religious sentiment to unify the region. Let's delve into the cultural overlaps between the Egyptians and the Cushites for a moment. Since these cultures have been interacting with each other for multiple centuries, they had developed an interesting rapport that extended beyond social mannerisms and into artistic and cultural trends. The Egyptian rule during the age of the New Kingdom had left an impact on the Cushites. Both cultures engaged in mutual exchange. There have been some accusations of the Cushites stealing their cultural legacy from the Egyptians. While it is true that the Cushites learned a lot from the Egyptians, they infused everything with an overwhelming vivacity of the African spirit. From visual arts to craftsmanship, the Cushites knew how to represent themselves. You have probably come across Egyptian hieroglyphics. The Cushites used hieroglyphics as well, although they were slightly different. The Egyptians also influenced the clothing and rituals of the Cushites. Cultural exchange is a natural phenomenon that occurs whenever two civilizations or even two tribes come together. You can see this exchange everywhere, from Picasso's inception of Cubism to European fascination with Orientalism. In the case of Egypt and the Kingdom of Kush, you can see it most clearly in the pyramids. Sudan contains almost 1,000 pyramids, out of which about 300 are structurally intact. Its modern-day neighbor, Egypt, known for its mysterious artifacts, has about 100. While the Egyptian pyramids are harmonious and grandiose, the pyramids in Sudan are steep, towering, and imposing. But to think that the Cushites inherited everything from their Egyptian contemporaries would be a step too far. The Cushites were great artisans. They were masters at the art of pottery. Some experts think that they were among the first Africans who learned how to enamel pottery. Similarly, the Cushites liked creating large structures called dafufas. These dafufas are amongst the first examples of brick used in Nile Valley civilizations.
Now, I want to add one, Sister Imani. I see you looking how you get access to these videos. Again, they on the hard drive. I'll contact you later and we'll talk about getting you access or getting you the hard drive. So we have a hard drive here. It's called the People's Library. It has over 6 terabytes of data. We have another hard drive that is in process of being developed, which is 12 terabytes of data, and on that hard drive will be everything that I'm using to create this curriculum. Woo! And so we can get you that. All right. Now, what I want to focus on also is when you realize that when they spoke of the trade routes and controlling the trade routes of the Nile, he talked about the other countries that were coming to Africa to the Nile. Why? Because they heard about people would travel. Men would travel and they would hear about the vastness of this area. So you're talking about China, India, which is also considered Ethiopia to the Greeks and Romans, were trading. Greek and Romans were trading with Africans. Now, it also states, you realize, again, European Voice is saying how Kush borrowed information. If you realize the war, Kush was upset that Greek could not hold their boundaries or their borders. So once they were able to establish themselves as a power unit, they went back over to Egypt because they said that it is said through Roman recording that Egypt is nothing but a settled, colonized from nomads from Kush. So when you realize that your daughter, not your parent state, but your daughter's state, is having problems, Kush went in, took it back control, and turned it back over for religious purposes. What? Again, war before the influence of colonialism. We didn't kill just for the sake of killing. We conquered for the sake of growth and sustained living, of communalism. And then they said, look, focus on your spiritual practices. You'll be able to keep your lands. Why? Because everything is tied to God. Man, let's continue.
If anything, their artistic aspirations increased tenfold once Pianki, also known as Pie, Kashta's successor, came into power and continued his campaign against Libyan rule over Egypt. As the kingdom of Kush slowly absorbed Egypt, the Egyptian masses welcomed the change in power. After his successful conquests, Pianki died, leaving the throne to Shabaka. In the 8th century BC, Shabaka managed to successfully establish and assert his dynasty. The 25th dynasty of Egypt, also known as the Nubian dynasty or the Cushite Empire, brought an influx of inspired creativity. Extensive care and support were levied to the arts and architecture. After Shabaka's death, Shabitku rose to power. Shabitku bore his share of scuffles with the Assyrians from the east, but managed to fend them off. Then came Taharka, the most important figure of the Nubian dynasty, who introduced writing into his courts. He also emphasized architecture, restoring old Egyptian temples and ordering the creation of new ones. His love for grandeur is visible in monuments throughout Egypt and across the Nile, including temples, baths, palaces, and most importantly, pyramids. After being restricted to Egypt by the Assyrians, he sharpened his focus on his building projects. One major example of this tunnel vision is the Temple of Karnak. A magnificent marvel of ancient Egyptian architecture, the temple is thought to have been a place of ritual and worship, where the sun god interacted and talked to the individuals. After Taharka's death, Tentamani came into power and tried to assert his dominance in the region by taking on the Assyrians, who did not take kindly to the notion. Their retort came in the form of plundering and looting Thebes. Thebes lay in a heap of ashes with no hope of revival. The Cushites had no choice but to retreat inwards. They never returned to Egypt again. Around 591 BC, they decided to settle in Meroe in northern Sudan. Meroe was rich in iron, ivory, gold, and other natural resources. They established stable trade routes to the Red Sea and the rest of Africa. Before long, the city became an esteemed commercial center. During this time, the Meroitic writing system took off, not just in courts, but also in the streets. There is overwhelming evidence that this hieroglyphic script became the general form of writing in the region. In 22 BC, the Cushites agreed to a truce with the emerging superpower of the time, the Roman Empire. Afterward, the land seemed to become a diasporic melting pot with tribal groups and mercenaries.
You know, I gotta stop right there. One, if you heard that once Cush started taking over Egypt, and you had the Cushite king that was there, it said that the people they welcomed the new regime. Why? Because it was a one love, Mike Ben. I see you. It was it was a it 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 was an extension of who they were. When you have leadership that takes you away from who you were called to be, and a new leadership comes to take over, because don't nobody walk away. Nobody subsides. Nobody, no king says, I'm not doing it right. Can you come do it? They don't do that. You have to take it over. You have to, so that when again, war and conquering lands before colonialism, then after colonialism. Now, when you look at this, Rome did not, when Rome came in and so look, if you want us, you want to be here, they have mercenaries. Rome was paying people just to kill. And then when you go into a place, you don't bring the best of you. No. Who do you leave? The people that the thuggy of thuggy thugs. And so now you have Egypt falling, Kush making friendships off of Rome, because Rome ain't going to stop. And I don't know, and we might have to get into that conversation and see if there's any information out there for us that tells us the treaty or whatever it took. But look what Rome left in grounds at Egypt, because Egypt could not hold their borders. So now Rome is controlling Egypt. And so now Kush is okay, we're gonna make amends with Rome. We're gonna make friends, because they ruling Egypt right now. And so when you do that, what do you leave there? Now you're gonna start dealing with European concepts of war and their influence in the level of evil. Why? Because those trade routes. They didn't have much of anything when it comes to, they didn't have a Nile River that stretched across the entire, it's like, what is it, over 8,000 miles? What? They didn't have it. They didn't have the greenery. They didn't have the flourishness they didn't have communalism. They were fighting to eat. And so when you got somebody there who, whoa, never ate before, y'all look up the book, The Iceman's Inheritance. Look it up. I had told a friend of mine, you need to grab that book if you can and read it. It was one of our other required readings. If I don't have the same copy. If I can find somebody with the copy, we'll use that as an African history to help us understand European mindset. But look at what happened. And now you talk about the spiritual entity that colonialism and the friendships with Europeans and interacting with a European lifestyle, the spiritual ramification of doing that. And this is why Kush had to take over Egypt over and over again, because you're falling short of who we are in God. Not because we wanted to take you over, but there is an identity we have, and we know that this would not be here if it wasn't for us. So we felt somewhat responsible. That's why you, out of 300 kings, 18 generations of kings in Egypt were from Kush. Talk about it. Know who you are. You gave great civilizations, science, mathematics, art, technology, everything. You shared what you could with the world. And what they couldn't understand, they destroyed. Understand what's going on. Now we're asking you, self-awareness, to teach a generation who will come, know who they are in history, know where they stand today, and know where we're going tomorrow. Afrofuturism was a conversation we discussed on The African Speaks, where you got to be able to, regardless of what they tell you your history is, you got to be able to see yourself in the future. And that's what teaching African history and African spirituality will do. Because we are making a movement, a social media movement, where World of Akibaland is bringing African history and African spirituality to everybody and everywhere across the globe. Wait, let me get back so we can continue and get this at the end of the video, because there's only a few seconds left.
In the 4th century AD, nomads by the name of Noba conquered the city, giving the name Nubia to the region. With its glory faltered, shrines abandoned, and ambitions trampled, the golden age of Kush was no more. Shortly afterward, the kingdom of Aksum invaded the city. By the 6th century, the kingdom of Kush had been dissolved, and Miro was abandoned, putting an end to a fascinating chapter in the history of northern Africa. A far more thorough treatise is...
Now, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to dive into the personalities, the kings, the queens. We're going to dive into them and look at, as we also study the African spirituality, please go, because you'll understand what makes a people when you see how they are and who they are in God, and why we struggled and fought, and why we shared what we shared. That's deeply important. But again, this journey down is a journey of self-awareness, and it's a journey of self-discovery, so that we can get to a journey of self-determination. World of Akibaland, roots and culture. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for African spirituality class. One love.